So my name is Bill Glass. I'm the Director of Visualization and Technology at the new IXL building in the University of Nebraska Medical Center. This is the building that's going up on the corner of 42nd and Emily Street if you're over in that area. One of the unique things about this is we're kind of bringing all of our simulation and training into one building, which is unique to some of the other situations where other schools that have training. So I have to kind of stumble through this first part because Ben Stobie, our colleague, was supposed to be here tonight, but he came down with an illness today, so I'm going to try and probably have to read off most of his bits, but he was going to talk a little bit about the early history of holograms and kind of what we're doing at IXL. So we're using, right now we're not using it for standardized patients, but once we get the new building up and running, we'll start using incorporating some of this. So right now, when we train the medical students, we use mannequin-based simulation and standardized patients, which are patient actors. So we're hoping to, sort of like they did in the movie here, have an artificial presence so that the students all have a similar experience. They can interview the patients. That'll be a little different from the movie in that in the movie there was no devices. It was just as though the person was kind of there. And then with the current technology, you have to have some type of device to interact with that. So we'll go over some of those and talk about those a little bit more. Let me see if I cover that. So some of the nice things we'll be able to do with the virtual patients is they'll be able to help with grief counseling. They can interview them for the patient histories. And the nice thing is it gives them the chance to do on-demand training versus right now they have to schedule with a standardized patient. And the other thing is that the actors kind of give a different response sometimes. So with the augmented patients, they would get a similar response so we can assess their abilities more fairly and accurately. A couple other examples that we're using in IXL is some of the technology I'll talk a little bit about is the augmented reality. We'll have a 5-sided laser cave, which would let you be immersed in any kind of situation. So for example, we do a lot of infectious disease training there. We train them in the hospital environment, but with the laser cave, we can put you in a virtual environment. So if you've trained in a hospital environment and you're going to be deployed to an austere country, maybe working out of a tent type thing, we can set up that situation for you, and we can add new challenges for you to have to react to, and we can assess how you reacted. So real quick on the history of holograms, they were early on, Henry Dirks developed something called the Dirksen I can't say that word. Anybody else can say that? Phantasmagoria. But he was, at the time, he was trying to disprove some of the mediums and stuff that were using some of these tricks to summon the spirits of the past. And so he tried to take a scientific approach to it. And he created this, I guess it was a Victorian trick where they would use kind of a slanted mirror and some light. And a gentleman by the name of John Pepper realized that he could use that in a theatrical approach. So the first example of that was in Charles Dickens's play, The Haunted Man. And so ever since then, that technique has been called Pepper's Ghost. And that's kind of what we'll be using as a hologram in the theater. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then the next advance was Dennis Gabor developed the theory of holography while working to improve the resolution of electron microscopy. And he coined the term hologram from Greek holos, meaning whole, and grammar, meaning message. So I guess if I'm like the John Hamm character, I'm showing off there, just researching here. And then in '68, Stephen Benton invented a white light transmission holography. Ben was going to explain that to you a little more. I'm not too clear on that, so we may have to skip over that a little bit. And I'll go to some more modern examples. And this is a type of augmented reality or enhanced reality we use currently. So the top image here is the Microsoft Hololens. And as you can see, he has a device on his head. So the augmented reality means that you can see your environment, and we sort of add things to your environment. So you can walk around, you can interact with some of these things if it's a mixed reality. But in the augmented reality, you can sort of place things in your environment, walk around. You can't interact with them so well in augmented reality. The virtual reality would be kind of like what we talked about, what I mentioned in the cave. And then we also have the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, which is sort of you're excluded from the real world. So we recreate your whole environment. So that would be an example where we put you in that sort of tent setting. And then the mixed reality would be kind of a combination of both, or the ability. It's mostly the augmented reality, but you can interact with it. So it was a little hard to come up with what we wanted to talk about this without having seen the movie. So we did some online searches and found some trailers and stuff. So hopefully we can tie in a little bit to this. But it seems like the movie focused more on the artificial intelligence than the augmented reality or virtual reality of it. But a couple of things that I did notice is that in this movie, the characters are seamlessly incorporated. As I mentioned, there's no device that you have to interact with. I did notice that there's no physical touching between the characters, which I think was an important part of the movie, and that they could only interact about talking about their memories, but there was no like physical touch or comfort. And I think they made a big point of that when he put his hands on her shoulders to comfort her, and some of the other scenes where there was some where they were dealing with grief and things where there was just no physical interaction. So that's going to be a challenge also. Let's see, what else did I talk about here? The examples that I saw was in one of the clips, she walks through his legs, so that kind of shows he's not there. And then when he throws the drink in his face, but other than that, they just seemed like other people in the other characters in the movie that were physically there. Oh, excuse me a second. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was kind of how people are using this technology now. And one of the big things is they're using it for interviewing and preserving the memories of Holocaust survivors. So I found this quote, remembrance is the secret of redemption, while forgetting leads to exile. And now, having seen the full movie, it seems like the theme of that movie might be a little bit different, that they kind of sanitized their memories versus trying to preserve some of these memories. So I want to show you a clip now that kind of shows how Hollywood, like a high-end approach to that. So I can talk. I don't think this has any narration, so I'll talk over this part. But basically, they take these survivors and they put them in these. That's called the light stage, and they do all different kinds of lighting. And so the reason they do this is they capture his performance under different lighting conditions, so that they can add him back to any situation. So if he was in this theater, they would put a little chrome ball in here and capture the lighting in here. And then when they played him back and you viewed him here, he would be, it would look like he was really here because the lights would react naturally off of him. So you can see that here where they've set him in some of these different environments. You can see the lighting change on him. So this is, the reason they do that is it's for the museum experience, it's a much more convincing, and this is a traveling museum. So if they set him up in a different environment, you get a sense that he's really there. And then here's a interview, a part with some audio, and you can see with the artificial intelligence, basically you ask a question and the computer will go back. Oops, let me go back. The
Hello, Pinchas.
Computer will answer the question.
Hello.
So, why do you tell your story?
I tell my story for the purpose of improving humanity, if that's possible, even drop.
So in this, the library behind him is not
like
really
a drop
there.
of water.
I mean, that's the physical
falls on a
environment, so he's
stone,
added over it.
and it erodes a little bit and smoothes it out. So hopefully, by me telling my story over and over again, I will achieve the purpose of making humanity or the world a better place to live in.
And then this is an example where they took it into a classroom. And the key thing here is to show that as you move around using this type of device with that high-end lighting, they use a lenticular screen, which means as I move from left to right, I kind of get the sense that I see different sides of his face, versus what we're going to be using in the IXL program is more the Pepper's Ghost, where you would be sitting there and you would see it on the screen. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But what I want you to notice here is
Do you remember any songs from your youth?
This is a
It's like the
lullaby that
talking
my
is
mother
or
used
the
to sing to me,
audio's
and I
not
still
lining up with
remember
it.
it.
See how you can see
It's in
different views
Polish.
of him?
Jadą
You'll notice his
dzieci,
hand here
jadą
kind of
drogą.
distorts. So they still have problems with that. So again, this is a physical device in the room that you're having to view it on. So with what we're doing, we're going to be using this a kind of a low-tech version of this. So we're going to use something called Pepper's Ghost that I mentioned earlier, and this video will kind of show you how it works.
What you are seeing is a reflected image which is so true and realistic to the original, it has become known as a virtual image. Many people perceive what they are seeing now as a 3D hologram. In fact, it is a 21st century take on a mid-19th century visual effect known as Pepper's Ghost, showing now on the relay screens.
So you'll notice there that if you're sitting out in front of that, you would perceive the person actually there. And so the way we'll utilize this at UNMC is if you're sitting in the audience, it looks like the person is actually on screen. And if you were to lean to the left or the right, because the projection is out in front of whatever we put behind it, you get the parallax, or a person could be on stage somewhat interacting with him. That's the technique they used when they did Michael Jackson and Tupac, when they brought them back at, I think it was Coachella. And then this is a little bit longer clip that kind of talks about
There was the mark that came.
Before I start that, this is produced by the company that we're partnering with to put in the holographic theater at UNMC. So toward the end, the beginning has a little bit of a interview video, but there's a part where you see her on screen, and that'll be more what we're doing. And the nice thing there is that we'll be able to bring in experts from around the world, and they can present virtually. So if you are the world's leading neuro expert and you lived in Switzerland, to come here and speak to our students or other professionals, you would have to take a couple of days off of work, fly in. You miss up to possibly a week of work, but using this setup, we could send you to a kind of like a weatherman. You would go to a studio, they would record you in front of a black screen instead of a green screen. And if we have a camera on our audience, you can interact with our audience live. And so that way you could take a couple hours out of your day and present versus, taking a week off. We can also record that, and we could go back and add special effects to it. So if you're discussing your heart, you could reach into your chest and kind of pull your heart out using some of the Hollywood effects. So we're looking forward to having that once the building opens and getting to create some technology. So I'll show this last video clip here.
There was the mark that came on our door. My mother opened the door, and there were soldiers standing there with a gun pointing at her. I have so much more to tell you, so please ask me questions.
This will be more what you would see at our theater.
So does anyone have a question for Fritzy? Yes? What was the hardest part of your experience in the concentration camp?
I thought I would die when I was walking towards the gas chambers. I thought I would die when I didn't have enough food.
This theater is where we truly bring survivors' voice and stories to life with a three-dimensional hologram that is capable of having a conversation with our audience. And so the survivor has been recorded answering thousands of questions, and through that recording and application of custom voice interactive technology, our visitors are able to hear a story and then ask their own questions and literally have a conversation that is just about as lifelike as it could possibly be.
It's a teaching tool. This is what we do here, and it is a teaching tool.
If my teachers didn't inform me that it was a hologram, I would have never known. I thought everything we were just hearing.
I feel humbled by the experience. I think it'll serve a great purpose for the future, because I was always concerned that once we die, the Holocaust will be a paragraph in history. They killed Jews. That's it. This will prevent it.
So that has a powerful message, and we'll be using this type of technology with our standardized patients. So it would be similar to the way the machine learning occurs over time. The more questions that are asked, our standardized patients would be interviewed for hours, and then we would encode each one of their responses. And then as the medical students ask the questions, they will get a better and more accurate response the more people that interact with it. And this is Dr. Gold, where we had to do an example in the Hololens, so we did a mock-up, but turned out pretty well. He's pretty proud, so I know he's very excited to have it in the new building. So I'll turn it over to Molly now, and she can talk about some of the work we're doing together and address some of the dementia.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody. And I just want to echo what Bill said. It was hard as we were preparing for this presentation what to show you or talk about, because we didn't see the show before the movie, or before tonight. So I'm just going to talk briefly about Home Instead, just to tell you who we are and why we're going to partner with IXL, and really focus a little bit on Alzheimer's and dementia, and then open it up to you guys for some questions. But Home Instead, are a lot of you familiar with Home Instead? I don't know. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot, but basically founded in 1994, franchise organization, and we hire people like Lisa, the caregiver in the film. That's the type of people that we hire to go into the homes of seniors and help them with everyday tasks. Our mission is enhancing the lives of aging adults and their families. We do this through 3 major platforms. One, Alzheimer's, which I'll talk a little bit about tonight. We do an extensive training program for our professional caregivers, and we also offer that for all of our family caregivers that we support, as well as anybody in the world who wants to look at our Alzheimer's training. It is available online as well. We also, specialize in helping our family caregivers, the ones we serve, as well as any family caregivers, because we have a variety of web properties and free resources available out there. And then, of course, aging, the senior, is at the heart of our care that we provide. And basically, our caregivers, what we're trying to do is just enhance their lives every day, help them live a quality life that they've lived their whole life. And one of the points that Marjorie said in this show, she said, I'm not trying to get better, I'm just trying to stay the same. That's kind of what I resonated with that very much so, because that's one of the things that we're trying to do as well. So I'm going to transition to dementia and Alzheimer's, just a couple brief slides, because in watching the trailer, you kind of thought that this show was a lot about memory and a memory disorder. And yes, Marjorie does have Alzheimer's or some sort of dementia. And I get the question a lot, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And dementia, I would say, is more of the umbrella term of a series of diseases that cause the severe mental decline, not understanding emotions and behaviors anymore, just memory loss. Those are some of the main symptoms. And Alzheimer's is really a type of dementia. And there's over 100 things that can cause dementia symptoms and dementia. Alzheimer's is probably the one we hear the most about. Just to give you a little glance into the brain, if you've never seen this, what it looks like, you can see the difference between the 2 types of brains. I'm not going to go into a lot about all the different lobes and what they do. If anybody's interested, we can talk about that after. But the hippocampus is the main spot in the brain where our memories are kept. It's that part of our brain where, as like tonight, for example, as we're remembering this event, our hippocampus is understanding what's happening and storing it right in that spot. And what happens with Alzheimer's disease is our brain starts to lose all of those connections. And you've heard the words plaques and tangles, which I'll show you a picture of in just a minute. But the hippocampus starts to shrink and get a lot smaller, and that's when we start to have a lot of these memory issues. So this is just another visual of what the stages look like. So probably Marjorie, for example, she'd probably been having some mild cognitive impairment for many years, where she's just forgetting things here and there, maybe just, walked into the room, maybe forgot what she was going in for, all kinds of different things adding up. over the years. Our brains are aging, so this happens gradually. You can see kind of the progression and how the brain is affected over and over, and it gets a lot worse. I would say that in the beginning, we're forgetting a person with Alzheimer's disease or a dementia that's in the mild to moderate stages are forgetting or not knowing how to do things like cook and get dressed, and they've forgotten those memories. When we get to the severe stages, that's where it's a lot more serious and it's total care. Can't feed themselves, can't talk usually anymore, bathe, dress, all of those things. So when it's Alzheimer's and those types of diseases, they are progressive and they do, get worse along the way. This is what those plaques and tangles look like. If you have not seen this visual, it helps me and it helps a lot of people see what these look like. So if you can imagine, your brain has lots and lots and lots of connections and nerves and all kinds of things going through it. And when these plaques and tangles build up, they're basically breaking those connections. The brain cells are dying, and that is what's causing this horrific disease and these big changes happening in the senior. So how we're partnering with iExcel, we basically, we're trying constantly to think of ways and help families and our professional caregivers gain some of that empathy for somebody that has an Alzheimer's or a dementia. It's hard because it's in our brain, and so we can't see it. When somebody has a different kind of a physical ailment, we can see and we can kind of empathize and we can kind of say, geez, what would it be like if I had a cast on and I had crutches right now? Well, when we have Alzheimer's disease or dementia, we cannot see what's happening inside the brain. So our goal and some of our partnerships with iExcel are to really help families and our caregivers understand what is happening inside the brain. So we're just in the beginning stages of working through that. We're going to get a lot more vivid with the pictures and some of the technology Bill just showed you. We're going to show our caregivers a lot of what's happening inside of the brain so they can really understand what is going on inside and how complex it is, and how it isn't the person, trying to be annoying and asking you the same question over and over again. It's something's failing in the brain and the connection is lost. There is a short clip I want to show you of a video Bill actually found, and it's a pretty well done video out of the UK, where it's the person with dementia. We're seeing the scene through her eyes, and we're seeing what happens as she's in just a neighborhood in her town, and how she's coping with a memory loss. So I'm going to show this clip. Bill, do you have something else to add about it?
Yeah, just before you play that, this format is not the way that it's designed to be viewed.
Oh, yeah. So
it goes into, I don't know if you've seen the commercials with the Samsung VR, Gear VR. So basically it's a little set of goggles you stick your cell phone in. And so this here, it's going to be sort of stretched out, but if you had that on, or if you had your cell phone, you could, if I looked this way, I would see what's on this side of the road. And if I look over here, so you kind of have to imagine that. Or if you go home and go to this link, I think it's alzheimersresearchuk.org. You can play it. If you play it on there, you can kind of scroll around, or you could access it off your phone and try it. But okay,
I'll show you this little clip here. Maybe.
Oh, there's that orange car. It's always parked there. Horrible colour. I can take this cut through back home. Hang on. Hang on. This isn't the right cut through. This isn't the alleyway. Where does this go? This isn't right. Oh, Joe. Joe. Where is Joe? Oh, that's Joe. Oh.
You'll see his face change here if you look close.
Joe?
Oh, no.
Sorry, you've mistaken me for somebody else. You all right? Can I help?
I'm really sorry. We're together.
Oh, right, okay. Well, no worries, eh?
Thanks for your help.
So basically, this video just trying to put the person in the shoes of the person with dementia. So if you can imagine, I remember the first time watching this, my hands got a little sweaty. Like, oh gosh, she's lost. Oh no, this is what this must feel like. So that's what our goal with our partnership with IXL is, to design some different training that can really help the professional caregivers, our family caregivers, really have that increased empathy, have some new resources and tools to actually help people that have Alzheimer's and dementia, and really just work together to bring more light to this disease, and even, not make it so fearful. It's great that this person in this video actually was going to go up and try to help this woman, when normally we'd just be like, who's this person? What's wrong with them? And keep going. I've seen that before happen. So anyway, I would just close by saying, we're going to open it up for questions. Again, I think that one of the major things about the primes in this show were really about coping with grief and loss, and that was kind of their main points, minus Marjorie was a lot about memory, but the other ones were really about coping. So we're open to any questions. I think we'll try to answer them best we can today. So thank you for your time and listening. We'll open it up.
In the pictures you showed of the brain with Alzheimer's, is the plaque the same kind of plaque that's in our blood vessels from like cholesterol?
It's very similar. Yep. It's. I guess I've not seen it in person. You've probably seen an autopsy of the brain closer than I have.
It's microscopic, so you don't really see it. But
yeah,
it's as Molly mentioned, it's a result of some breakdowns and different pieces sort of accumulating, and the brain can't flush them out, and so as they accumulate, they sort of clog things up and cause extensive, or I guess it's a gradual sort of spreads from lobe to lobe, and that's what causes you to progress through the stages.
Okay, sure.
Why would you use augmented versus virtual reality?
Well, it would depend on what the situation you're trying to do. So one of the problems, or one of the other differences with augmented reality with the Microsoft HoloLens or your cell phones, I can walk around in here, so I can interact with things in the environment. I don't have to worry about tripping over that table or losing my balance. We've noticed that when people put on the virtual reality, if you tend to bend over forward, you get off balance. So you have to have somebody there to sort of be ready to catch them. You're also blind to the rest of your environment, so you might trip over these chairs. So you really can't experience it by yourself. And the other big limitation is that you're tethered to a computer. So the HoloLens processes all the data within the headset, but with the Oculus Rift or the Vive or some of the other ones, you have to have this a pretty thick tether back to the computer. But the nice thing about virtual reality is you can interact with the environment much more than augmented. So right now, Microsoft is kind of the main player in the augmented space as far as what we're working with. I know Apple's coming out with some new things, but the limitation with the HoloLens in particular is you've got 2 or 3 gestures that Microsoft has developed, and they haven't opened it up for anything further. So you're kind of limited to, clicking and moving something and placing it. That's about it.
Mine is more of a comment than a question. My mother and my mother's mother and 3 of my mother's sisters all had Alzheimer's. So I feel like me and my sister, we joke but not joke that we're doomed, we're doomed to that reality. But my comment is more like, I'm thrilled that this is all happening, because hopefully by the time I get to the age where I could potentially show those symptoms the way my family did, that, there's hope for, if not a cure, then something way more advanced than what we have now to help that person get through. And I'm pretty sure my husband's pretty excited about that too, because he'd be the one that have to deal with me. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I sorry that that's been happening in your family. What do you mind commenting on the age that? Sorry.
It's okay. My mother was 76 or 8 when she passed, something like that. We had to put her in a nursing home, and it was excellent care. My mother and my father died almost to the day, a year apart, and my dad went first, and my mother would forget. So every time she'd say, "Where's Dad?" Well, Mom, Dad's in heaven. And then, at first she would get really upset, like learning it for the first time over and over, which was extremely painful to watch. Eventually she would just go, "Oh, okay." My grandmother was that age as well. And I was young enough at the time to not really understand what was going on with her. She was in a nursing home in a little town called Erling, Iowa. And I remember going up to see her. I was in high school, and I was so excited to see her, and I ran up to her to give her a big hug, and she was, as they said in those days, tickled pink, that somebody was so excited to see her. She looks me straight in the face and says, "Who are you?" And that was hard. My aunts, I was basically the same, the one that I remember. The other two, I'm not sure.
Well, thank you again for sharing your story. I know that's hard to share. A couple things I'd say is there is, a lot of researchers. There's a couple of different camps, I would say. There's a camp of researchers and doctors and geriatricians who would say that it's genetic, and yes, that you might be getting the disease because of your genes. There's another camp and a growing amount of research that says that our brains are very much like our hearts, and how we treat our hearts, and exercise and eating right, and all the things that we do to keep heart healthy are going to help our brain stay healthy. So I share that with you and with everybody, that the research is showing that we can impact how well our brains age. If you think of it as your brain is similar to how your heart ages, or how any part of your body ages, actually. So I hope that helps you a little bit. There is a little bit of control, or there's a little bit where you can hopefully influence and delay onset, because guys, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the older we live, the greater our chances become of getting some sort of a dementia, short-term memory loss. Doesn't have to be Alzheimer's, but the older we get, that's our chances go up. So the more we can delay, and when we delay or reduce our risk, those are things that we can do are sometimes in our control with our eating and our diets and our exercise and how we use our brains and on all of those different things. So again, thank you for sharing. Great. Oh, okay. And socialization is huge when it comes to taking care of your brain and reducing risk. Okay, Okay, there's a lot of
Got one
things.
up here.
There you go. Sorry.
Hi, I actually have a question for the gentleman over here, but first of all, just a couple of comments about the dementia. First of all, my great-grandmother had severe dementia, and it was, I believe, Alzheimer's, and I can remember being a young child and the "Who are yous" coming out, and nobody else in my family has developed that. So my grandmother was terrified about it and took memory pills until she died at 95. CoQ10. The other comment I was going to say is that my ex-father-in-law in New York has some form of dementia, not Alzheimer's, and his neurologist has been treating him with some mild form of medication normally targeted toward people with severe schizophrenia. He takes a mild dosage of that, and it seems it helps him. So his memory is slightly better than it was before he started taking that. No idea which it is, but just kind of interesting information. My question has to do with the augmented reality that you were talking about there. my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and they're gone now. And so when I see something like that, I think it's absolutely phenomenal. My question is, are there other areas where that kind of augmented reality is being done as intensively as with the Holocaust survivors?
I'm not aware of other areas. I know Hollywood's doing a lot of stuff, but as far as preserving history type things, I've not heard much about it. I don't know if there's a group here in Omaha. I think it's a smaller group that's maybe trying to, it's more of recreating some of the Oregon Trail stuff than, but I haven't really kept up with what they're doing. So, but the augmented Holocaust thing, I believe it's through the Shoah Foundation. So I think they're trying to, interview as many people as they can right now. So you might contact them if you have relatives that would be able to participate in that.
Good evening. A quick question about the Uncanny Valley. So as we build these sort of modules for medical students, is there any concern that these students will have bias towards those holograms that they clearly don't see as human beings?
Thank you, Zach. That's a loaded question, and he knows that, so that's why he asked that to me. So if you're not familiar with the Uncanny Valley, that's where things look kind of spookily identifiable, or you almost believe them, but there's something about it that's not quite right, and so you really don't trust it. So I'm assuming you're talking about they sort of become desensitized to the real. Yeah, so I haven't had enough experience with that yet, but there has been a lot of discussion of that. But one of the big things we hear is the bedside manner of our medical students these days is a little lacking. And there's a lot of theories on that, because when they learn now, a lot of them don't like to learn in groups. They kind of like to learn on their phones, or they'll go off and learn individually, because so much content is available online and such. So we're hoping to create experiences that encourage them to have a little more humanity. And as Molly mentioned, in some of these Alzheimer's pieces, we're trying to build in some empathy, building tasks and exercises. Does that answer your question, Zach? Sure does. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Molly?
I've got a question, Bill, right up here. So like every day, people see, images online, images on Twitter that have been photoshopped, that are not real. Is there any talk, in the world in which you're working, in the literature, about like misuse of this type of technology and creating scenes and scenarios that didn't really happen for some nefarious purpose?
Yeah, there's a very good, I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the show Radio Lab on NPR. If you go look online, there's an episode that talks about this in particular. So there was some software from Adobe that allows you to go in, and you can take a few minutes of somebody talking, and then you can go in and it'll record the, it'll do speech to text, and then you can go in and change the text, and it will have that person speak. And I think it's not Jordan Peele, but the other one, Key from Key and Peele. He's on stage being interviewed, and there's something about, he talks about he won some award, and the first thing he did was kiss his wife and hug the dog or something. And so they changed it. The first thing he did was kissed his dog and hugged his wife. But he's on stage listening to it, and he can't quite believe it. And so then they go on to talk about how you could use that, and they do some examples of some of the presidents talking, and they change what they say, and it's very, very hard to perceive it. And so they don't, I think they took some video footage also. There's another part in that you can link to, where they can use, similar to what we showed with Pincus when they were capturing him. They can go through and do motion capture, and in this video they have people that have little markers on their face. So I can be off screen and have a camera on my face, and I can cause, I think in the example it's George Bush, I can cause him to emote exactly. He's delivering a speech, but if I wince or smile, he does that exact same thing, and it's very hard to perceive that it's not real. So I think they asked Adobe not to release that first software. I don't know where it stands now, but if you go online and look for, I think it was Radio Lab, and there's links to that. But so there is a big concern with that, I think.
We probably have time for one more question if anyone's got one that's just burning.
Oh yeah, here, hold on one second. So I find it very interesting that you touch on empathy, as I work in hospice as a spiritual coordinator and bereavement care. And I thought this movie touched very heavily on the things I see daily. My training isn't special. Many of the complaints they have had are their doctors don't have empathy. They do not understand. Their family does not understand them. They don't know how this happened. There's a lot of confusion. But most of all, they don't have activities during the day to engage them. So recently, I took my 16-year-old son for his birthday to La Vista Papillion. There is a VR cafe there. I want to encourage every single one of you to go. There was a recent article, and I went and shot aliens. I did trip across the cable, and it took me a couple moments. Mom, you're going to hit me, and yeah. But I saw an article in the Omaha World Herald, and they touch on how a couple came in, and she was able to go into her own village and go back to where she was from. After living overseas for 18 years, I'm very excited to pay $30 or whatever it may cost me for a half hour. This technology is not cheap, though. Where are you getting your funding? Are there grants? Are there things? I know we can do it on small scales, but what is this going to look like for healthcare already that is extremely expensive for most people? If the doctors are getting training through there, are we going to be pushed onto that later through our own healthcare and our own bills to where we can't afford it?
Afford the healthcare or afford
the healthcare as a result of
okay.
this training, that we see as entertainment now, but once it's implemented later, do we see another problem arise from it?
Well, we're very fortunate at IXL that we're located in Omaha, where we have a very generous benefactors or donors that are interested in healthcare, and many of them are octogenarians now, so they're wanting to, leave behind something that's has an impact on their children and their community. So that's where most of our funding comes from right now. As with most technology, it's expensive in the beginning, but right now it's driven by entertainment mostly. So hopefully the expense will be borne by the gamers and the people that are early adopters, and as it spreads, becomes more and more popular, the price will go down and it'll be more affordable. I don't think it'll impact the cost of training, because there's a lot that we can there's a lot of savings we can do with it. So for example, one of the things we do at IXL is we have something called an eye wall, which is a multi-touch large screen. And an example, we created an application for the pharmacy students. So if you're a pharmacy student, one of the early things you learn to do is fill, you might be considered sort of like a short order cook, in that you get hundreds of orders from the hospital that you have to fill. So they have to learn to fill these orders correctly. So they have a mock pharmacy that has, samples of all the medicines that they might need. They have to take each one of those medicines, put it in the little bin to be distributed to the room. Somebody has to check it. So there's the cost of each of those items, the cost of the shelf, the time it takes to take them off and put them back on. So we were able to do a sort of a drop and drag that you can use on your iPad or on this wall we have. And so you can go in and we can just take a photograph of these things, so we no longer have to support that inventory. For example, if there's 140 students in the average medical class per year, then we, even something as simple as teaching them how to use a syringe, we have to have 140 syringes, and there's the potential of 140 needle sticks. We have another application where you can learn to do a medicine draw with pulling the plunger back properly, some basic things. But the fact is that if we can recreate it one time, we can distribute it to everybody's phone. So we don't have to have the 140 needles. We don't have the potential for somebody getting a needle stick early on. So there's a lot of savings like that I think we're appreciating right now.
All right. Well, Molly, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your work with us tonight. Thank you to UNMC. If you're not already attending the Science Cafe events next door, get on their email list and social media and all that stuff because it's great programs. And keep an eye out for May 8th. Bugs will be the next Science on Screen here, and Eternal Sunshine will be June 5th. So we'll have some information going out about that soon. So thank you all for being here, and thank you again to both of you.